Welcome to the Quilters Hall of Fame in Marion, Indiana. I'm Jack Edson, and this is my art show, Portraits and Patterns. I'd like to start with the self-portrait, which was done 1 year ago. For one thing, the large size of the piece, and I think it's a nice mix of an image of myself when I was about 35 years old, but really made with some pretty bold quilt block patterns that of themselves have nothing to do with the portrait. I like to think that in much of my work, they're basically quilts to begin with, something you could put on a bed. It does have the 3 layers, but then the aspiration is always to be art. In this case, in the tradition of the self-portrait, and in many other cases, of the tradition of portraits of great artists throughout art history.
I'm going to get a close-up of some of these.
The portrait of the great artist Bernini, both painter, architect, and most notably sculptor. He's from Italy, but I used the American patchwork pattern of the pineapple throughout. And it's a pattern that many people kind of steer away from because it looks very difficult to do. But in fact, it's just a log cabin going in the horizontal and vertical as well as diagonal. It's a very dynamic shape, which really, for my quilter friends, it's not that difficult to do once you try it. You must do it on a machine. If you do it by hand, they just don't lie flat. This one, I think, is the most extreme example of individual blocks that work by themselves, but put them all together and you end up with this very striking portrait. Sometimes distance is required to see the image, and I like to think that once you see that image, you just can't erase that image from your brain afterward, once you see that it is a face. One interesting thing about my work is that usually digital photography makes it look more like the face than like it is in real life. I think my work pretty much is in between the portrait and the block. But if you look at it only through the digital camera, which has a certain app in it that makes more faces out of everything, it looks quite different. They're very hard to photograph. So that's why it's a good idea to see them in person. It's very exciting to be here at the Quilters Hall of Fame, which is in the home of the quilter Marie Webster. And it was built in 1902. 1911, she was doing quilting. And I really love the homey feel of the museum. After all, it is a home with these wonderful fireplaces and mantels. This is one of my first quilted, fabric collage piece of the self-portrait. And once again, it uses realism for the face, but who could resist using quilt block patterns, in this case, rooftop. To my right, we have the portrait of the French Impressionist artist, Edgar Degas. And somebody at the Birchfield Penny Art Center in Buffalo pointed out that almost every portrait I do of an artist is somebody that kind of looks like me or did at some point in my life. So see if you feel that way when you look at the pieces. This piece is Thomas Aiken's Hexagon, and I did it in the year 2020 during the COVID isolation period. The world felt like it was kind of spinning out of control, and I thought a perfect quilt block pattern to use during that time period would be tumbling blocks. In this, we have the portrait of Akins, and it is long arm quilted by Hiroko Myers of Ohio. She's actually from Japan, and she did a wonderful virtuoso quilting for this piece, which she did so I could have it in this show. It was too much for me to do, and she was able to just have me send it to her, and 2 weeks later, done. So it was very much appreciated. This sort of uses my formula for portraits of a light side and a dark side, of darks against lights, lights against darks, which is very successful usually. It's one of the things I look for. Then of course the subject matter, Thomas Aikens, the great American draftsman, painter, and did some sculpture as well as photography, whose work I admire a great deal, and his life I find very intriguing. This is a portrait of the great Italian artist Caravaggio, and he was the great master of light and dark, very theatrical lighting. I have tried to see as many Caravaggio paintings as I can. I saw one yesterday in the Cleveland Museum of Art, the Martyrdom of St. Andrew, and it's always a thrill to see his work. He was a wild person, to say the least, and either he had patronage and protection from either someone wealthy, royalty, or in the church, or he was kind of running out of town in many cases. So he's somebody whose life we might not emulate, but his work is fabulous. In this one, I tried to have certain quilt block patterns that are related to the portrait, but really are kind of demanding attention on their own. There's probably about 10 of them throughout the piece, and this shows the very large range of colors that our eyes can interpret as flesh color and the hair color. When I was approaching When I had finished the face, I had large areas of hair and background to do, and I decided to really gild the lily to make it as fantastic as possible, and included these kind of 9 patches of gold little pyramid, little squares, which all have a light side and a dark side. And Hiroko quilted this piece also, and taking time to add a great deal of stitching to those gold medallions, really taking it from kind of good to great, I think. Sometimes we need the help of someone else in quilting. If you think about it, I mean, doing the top is one skill, and the quilting is really quite a different skill set. And I do a lot of my quilting either by hand or in a rudimentary way on a long arm machine. But when I have a piece like this, it seems worthwhile to call out, a great master of long arm quilting, and really trust in them to see what great work they can do to enhance it. Plus, I think I could do 3 tops in the time it would take me to quilt one piece by hand.
Go.
This log cabin quilt, a miniature, is probably 35 years old now, but I thought it was important to put in the show because it shows kind of like my aesthetic and my color combination. I have the theory that almost each artist, the work of each artist is probably identifiable, even if it's done over a long period of time. This one I just copied out of a book, something like 100 Great American Quilts, and the pieces are, I think, less than 1/4 of an inch wide. And this one, it has my beloved color combination, red, yellow, black, and white, which you'll see in most pieces, but also some green and blue. And I feel that this piece is really energized by the placement of these greens and blues in it. There's 2,100 pieces in this. Here's the, it's important to sign and date our work because time goes by so fast and we never can really remember which decade some of these are made in.
You hand quilted this one too, right?
Yes, it's, this is kind of like my rudimentary. I often, if the piece is horizontal and vertical, I usually quilt on the diagonal. It's a nice little trick to add variety, and the diagonal is much more dynamic shape usually than the horizontal and vertical. Yeah. Not that I don't love them too. This is a portrait of the great artist Henri Toulouse-Lautrec dressed as a clown. 1 year ago, October 2019, I went to the Grand Palais in Paris, and to my great surprise, there was a retrospective of the work of Toulouse-Lautrec. So I saw almost everything he did in that one afternoon, and I was struck by many black and white photographs of the artist dressed up in costumes. He might be a very pretty Japanese lady, except he had a beard. Or he might be this clown made out of a funny hat, and I think it was maybe a woman's garment thrown around him. The photographs were all black and white. There, of course, was no color photography till much, much later. But I find that in using black and white photographs, they liberate me to use my own color combinations. Nobody really knew if the hat was yellow. Nobody knew if he had this kind of rainbowy boa thrown around himself. He died young. He had a life of substance abuse and health problems, and he was always trying to amuse people as well as amuse himself, even though his life was pretty sad in many respects. And I tried to catch that in the eyes. Sometimes I begin a portrait with the eyes. Other times the eyes might be the final piece that I make for the quilt, kind of letting all the energy of doing the outside of the portrait build up in me when finally I'll do the eyes. But this one began with the eyes. If this one didn't have, super eyes, there was no reason to continue. Although I must say I've never not finished one of these portrait quilts. There are a couple that aren't completed yet because they need more time. But as far as your UFO or your abandoned project, pretty much never. So not exactly sure what that means, but I hope that's of great hope for everyone. This is my first portrait quilt, an image of the mother of the artist Georges Seurat sewing. And this was a challenge quilt somebody asked me to do. You know, they give you a bag of maybe 4 different kinds of fabric and you have to use those. So I thought this was a wonderful image. I love the work of Seurat, and of course the mother is sewing. And in this one, I restricted myself to only certain shapes in each block. Maybe, you know, of course, the square, the half triangle square, a 4-patch. There might be a couple of others, but these were the restrictions I put on myself. I can only use those. And of course it's black and white. He was a great draftsman, and he had seen a show of his drawings only, and it inspired me a great deal. Well, one funny thing about this was I always brought them into work and showed the people at work what I had done. And one of the women at work, I held it up and showed it to her, and I said, yeah, I just made this. And she said, oh, that's nice. I said, yeah, it's a picture of the mother of Georges Seurat sewing. And the woman at work said, no, it's a horse. So I said, no, it's from this drawing of Seurat's mother sewing. And she said, Jack, it's a horse. So get ready for this when you do your masterpieces. This piece has 2 quilts, a self-portrait of the young me, age 35 or so, and a portrait of me 35 years later, approaching 70. So we're using the same image we've seen a couple times for this one. There's an interesting story. I was having a visit from a curator of an art group in Buffalo. He was coming out to see my work, and I was working on this piece at the time. And usually I do the faces in a completely symmetrical way. You know, you could just about divide them right down the bridge of the nose. Well, since I knew he was coming over, I added this row to this part of the head, figuring next I would balance it on this side. So I showed him this piece, I laid it on the floor, and he said, that's really great. I like the asymmetrical quality. And he said, why did you do that? I said, well, because I didn't finish the other side yet. And he said, no, you know, this is really interesting because it's asymmetrical. And I thought, let's think that one over. And I did it in an asymmetrical way, and then did the companion piece. I actually posed in front of a camera trying to get the same face, you know, design as in the earlier one. So the idea is, you know, I used to be young not that long ago, and for people that are young now, you'd be surprised how it flashes by so quickly. The other point is sometimes we should listen to other people's advice. Sometimes we should not, but sometimes we should. This one has an interesting piece in the little splash of light on the eye, which is a fussy cut little, I don't know, sunflower or daisy or something. So rather than cut all those pieces, sometimes you can just use a printed fabric and, you know, might as well just use it. This one has a little bit of humor in the eye also. It has a little figure of a little, I don't know, angel or fairy or somebody. And then one of my ideas is that with portraits, we, the viewer, are looking at the portrait, but the portrait is looking right back at us. So it's this intriguing relationship that happens with portraits. This one to my left is an earlier piece It's signed 1993 with a hand-embroidered signature, which I did not write and then embroider over. I just embroidered it, which I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just kind of making it. And then the idea we've got to fulfill the book resonates with me on many levels. On one hand, it's a song by Bob Marley and the Wailers, redemption song. We've got to fulfill the book. And then if you ever drive through the South, you might see religious billboards with religious slogans, repent and be saved, or other verses from the Bible. And this one, which is put on a book, the image of a book, resonates with me also because I had a career of 45 years working as a librarian. 45 years. And the idea with this one, first of all, it is the shape of an authentic book. I mean, there's nothing, kind of smudged or approximated with this. That's a book. And also, it's floating kind of out in the heavens. So think about that in your life, fulfilling the book, whatever way it means to you. This image is called John Lennon, Imagine, from the title of one of his songs, as well as the imagination that takes over when we're encountering art or art in quilts. We know it's just a two-dimensional piece of fabric, but if we let our imagination take over, this can become a three-dimensional image with some parts coming forward, some parts receding, as well as a pretty realistic image of a certain person, John Lennon. This one, I did 4 of them. It's probably my most popular quilt, and people are always asking, oh, can I get one, that kind of thing. So I decided I would make 2. And what I did was there are 2, I believe, 2-inch squares, but I made pieces that were 2 inches by 8 inches, and just sewed together all of them for each row, and then cut them into 4 pieces. So I had 4 strips. Talk about try not to get these mixed up when you're doing it. It's very easy to, think you were sewing one to the other. The 4 pieces are identical other than the borders and this block in the lower left-hand corner. Each of them has a different color, whereas every other one is from actually a 8-inch piece cut into quarters. And this is 2017. It was a great opportunity to use such a huge variety of fabric. We all have a ton of fabric, right? And some of it we're never going to use, but if you use an image like this, it gives you a great opportunity to bust out some of that fabric and put it to use.
Okay.
I don't know how to do it. This piece is Thomas Aikens' Odelisk. And Aikens used a good many nude figures in his work. In this one, he's the subject. He had someone else take a picture of him in this Odelisk pattern, which is usually reserved for female models. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And one of the things I wanted to do in it was kind of invent a new quilt block. Now, I don't know if anyone's ever done this before, but it started off as a 9-patch, and then I turned it on the diagonal, put triangles around that, and then ended up with these very thin strips which create a lattice work over the figure, maybe as if we were looking at it through a fence. There's really not much random about this one. Certain pieces I did change out toward the end because it just had to have this very high aesthetic appeal. This was on display in the Visions Art Museum Rhapsody show last year, so it was a big thrill.